Meeting of the July 24th school board meeting. Our first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance, and the flags have changed, so they're this way to your right.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2A is the consent agenda. We have one item under the consent agenda that I would recommend pulling out as it was a late addition. So that will become essentially item 2A unofficially. So on the first consent agenda, do I have a motion for approval?
Do we know which item's coming out?
Sorry, the item that's at your desk, there's another resignation later from David Tack. I apologize that I wasn't clear on that. So we'll remove the David Tack resignation, but for the rest in the consent agenda, do I have a motion for approval?
Could you repeat that again?
I'm looking for a motion for approval for the consent agenda. The David Tack resignation will essentially be item 2AA.
I move approval.
Okay, is there a second? Second by Bill. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Now moving on to the resignation that was pulled out of the consent agenda. Everyone has a copy at their desk, as well as the new policy that was implemented, granting a release from a contract. And I'll let Dr. Brenner go through that.
Thank you, Madam President. If you recall, the board worked through a policy after we had several people asking to be released from their contract during the instructional year last year. It became evident that we were seeing more and more of that, so we wanted to have a little more teeth to people getting out of their contract, particularly in the middle of the school year. So that became effective on July 15th, where penalties could be implied by the board if anybody would break their contract after signing their contract. In this case, one of our exemplary leaders in the district, Dr. David Tack, our avid district coordinator, has been offered a similar-like position in East Grand Forks, and he's asking to be released from his contract. And he also did ask if the 5% penalty of his salary could be waived. And just to take you through the descriptor code DKBB, there are three conditions which the board can think about and discuss regarding a request for a release from contract. The first is granting an unconditional release from a contract. The second is deny temporary or table the request with the understanding that the administration will be directed to facilitate the granting of the request by seeking an adequately qualified replacement. Or the third is to deny it altogether. The way we work through the policy, this would be our first litmus test of somebody who did sign a contract indicating he would be returning, but is now not returning. So if I speak with my heart, and knowing all the exemplary work Dr. Tack has done for us, I have one opinion, but when I think about policy, and as I said to our administrative cabinet this morning, as long as you stay with policy, 99.9% of the time, policy is going to be your friend. It's when you deviate from policy, when you start getting into trouble, because there are some unintended consequences that do arise. So it's really the board's discretion to stay with the 5% penalty, or to make a decision other than that. So I will leave it up for board conversation.
Are there any questions or discussion on the matter?
I have one maybe comment to make, and maybe this is kind of a question for Dr. Brenner. Can you guys hear me okay?
Go ahead, Joel.
Okay, sure, thank you. So I was on the airplane on the way back from San Francisco with David Tech. And so it feels like if we just invested several $1,000s on some additional education, perhaps this is one we would say, it's justified for the district to get a little something back, since we just 3 weeks ago invested several grand into them. Just a thought. But I agree. Great guy, solid leader, tough loss. So from the heart, it makes sense to say best wishes, we'll see you around, but also we just spent a bunch of cash, so just food for thought.
Okay, other comments? Cynthia?
I guess my conflict internally is that it's my understanding that the initial decision to do that policy was that we were having resignations during the school year, the academic teaching year. So for example, I'm remembering teachers who left in, say, February or March, and that puts the district at a very difficult position. So in this case, it's before the start of the school year, and I understand he is employed over the summer, I guess?
A portion of the time, he's not here the entire month of July. I think he's off in July. So your point's well taken. The technicality in this is he signed his contract. If he hadn't signed his contract, we'd probably be chasing him down to sign his contract, and then we might be having a different conversation. But because he did, that's why the policy kicks in.
And I don't know the timing of when that position was, I mean, we don't need to get in the weeds of that. The other piece for me that pulls me is that his resignation letter was the 20th, and when was the policy made effective? Like, what's the effective date of the policy?
July 15th.
Right, so to me, unless he had an offer earlier, I don't think he'd have a choice. And I guess I respect his service and his longevity, or his work in this area. I mean, I'm disappointed to see that he's resigning. So that's where I'm at right now. So I would be voting, I guess, to make an exception.
Any other feedback or questions, comments? Go ahead.
Just a clarification, on what date was the new contract signed?
I don't have that in front of me, but contracts went out in June, and I don't have the date when his was signed, but clearly before July 15th.
Go ahead, Josh.
It's just a clarification on effective date of the policy. If I'm looking at the date on the bottom, it says July 1st. Is it the 1st or the 15th? I mean, I think that also makes a bit of a difference in this, but.
It was in effect on the 1st, but GFEA was seeking clarification of when we were going to enact it. When we had talked, when the policy was being written, we really didn't land on a date when the penalty would be enforced. Is it going to be 2 weeks before the school year, 3 weeks before the school year? And when I met with then Vice President Flynn and President Lunn, July 15th was the determined date.
As a reminder, board members also have the DKBBBR, which stipulates that the board may grant a release from the contract for the following reasons: that reasons of personal health, where a physician statement supports the request, serious illness or death in the immediate family that requires a contracted staff member's absence for an extended period of time. The board may also, in its sole discretion, grant release from contract for other reasons. For example, one that was talked about is military orders or deployment. That's unexpected as well. So I think we'd be setting a precedence on any policy if we're making decisions where we say there's an effective date at X, and then we're going back and saying, oh, well, it's close enough to that time frame after the enacted policy. I mean, that's the same as the years of experience that we've enacted. It's the same thing for early retirement and Unfortunately, we set a policy and, those are what we have to follow. There are exceptions to the rules, which is what, the board agreed upon outlining in that BR. So I think those are to be taken into consideration, making a decision, but we do have policy timelines, unfortunately. And I think one point of clarification, and Dr. Brenner just let me know if this is accurate, but any circumstance that a board would deny a resignation or approve a resignation and, in this case, they asked specifically for a request to waive the fee, that person could reconsider and choose not to leave, correct?
That depends.
Yeah.
If you accept the resignation tonight under conditions or no conditions, then that person technically is no longer employed.
Okay. Any further clarifying questions or comments? The standard would be that we would have a motion to approve the resignation. In this case, they've asked for a waiver, so I think it would be good to clearly document that if we're approving or not approving, but at this time, given our policy, I would ask for a motion to approve the resignation with no waiver of the fee. Meaning he would be required to pay if he's released from the contract. Okay, we have a motion on the table by Jeff. Is there a second? The motion would be that we would approve the resignation without granting a waiver of the fee. Okay, second by Josh. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Okay, we'll now take a roll call vote.
Dockler is absent. Larson?
Aye.
Lund is absent. Manley?
Yes.
Palmesino?
Yes.
Shab?
No.
Anderson?
Yes.
Berger?
Yes.
And Dockler is absent. And Flynn?
Yes.
6 yes, 1 no. 2 absent.
Motion carries. Next, we will have the approval of Valley Middle School Central Kitchen and Safety and Security Construction Manager at Risk. I think this is the first time we get to hear officially from Mr. Elwine. Brandon?
Thank you, President Flynn, members of the board. Yes, precisely it. What a fitting opportunity to hear from Jonathan Owen, B&G Director. He has led us through a process that is stipulated by state statute, and it takes even more coordination just to get everybody a diversity of thought in the room and to evaluate through paper application and then interview process. So I will hand it over to Mr. Elwayne to come through, explain the memo, and present the administrative recommendation and the committee selection.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Elwine, the Director of Building and Grounds. I'm here, and as Brandon said, there is a rigorous process in determining our construction manager at risk that is outlined by North Dakota Century Code. We formed a committee that had members of Grand Forks Public Schools, the design team, and industry professionals, and we had a rubric, again, as stated by the Century Code, on how we needed to grade these. We received 2 applications, PCL, community contractors, which is one. And construction engineers, we reviewed their proposals and we decided to interview both. And after the interviews, we found that construction engineers received the highest overall score, and we would like to recommend them. So our administrative recommendation is to approve construction engineers as the CMAR for construction of the New Valley Middle School, central kitchen, and safety and security projects.
Are there any questions? Go ahead, Cynthia.
I didn't have a chance to, they're both local, right?
Correct, both are local. PCL is a national company, but they partner with community contractors to do projects locally.
And how close were these two on the rubrics?
I have that right here. The average score for construction engineers was 268.8, and for PCL community was 228.4.
Any additional questions? Go ahead, Dr. Brennan.
And just to clarify, that was out of 280 total points. So where the points came from.
Well, Bill?
Yeah, do we have any concerns with this, as big a project this is, two really different, completely different projects that one firm can do all of it?
We had those discussions and we determined that this was the best course of action, especially because we're trying to stagger the central kitchen and valley to allow there's a lack of contractors to allow them to move behind each other. And then the safety and security we can do on a piecemeal basis. We can kind of pick and choose. So we thought it would be best to hold this all under one umbrella just for cost savings and just for coordination with our design team.
Any additional questions? I'll seek a motion of the district's approval to approve construction engineers as the construction manager at risk. Okay, Bill motions approval, Cynthia second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. We will now move on to item C, cabinet level administrative salary recommendations.
Thank you, Madam President. On page 12 of your packet, you have outlined in front of you our three cabinet-level positions: Amy Barch, Chief Academic Officer; Brandon Bombach, Business Manager; and Catherine Galach, Associate Superintendent of Secondary Education. What I've highlighted here for you is offering them the same percent increases as all of the other four negotiating groups, which was, just as a refresher, 8% in year one, 5% in year two. So for Amy Barch, Chief Academic Officer, in the first year, her base salary combined with her education factor, she would be at $138,734. And in her second year with her base and education factor, she'd be at a total salary of $145,596. For Brandon Bombach, his base salary in year one is $140,000, and in year two, with the increase, it would be $147,420. And for Ms. Galach, her base salary in year one is $171,192. When you add the education factor, her total salary is $174,092. And in year two, her base salary $179,752, education factor $2,900, but she is going to complete her doctorate sometime this year, so that will change that number for a total salary of, at the very least in year two, $182,652. It's my recommendation that the school board approve salary increases as presented for Chief Academic Officer Amy Barch, Business Manager Brandon Bombach, and Associate Superintendent Catherine Galach. Thank you.
Are there any questions? I just have a process question, specifically for the doctorate. If a new degree was given, what's the process? Does it automatically shift? Does it come back to board approval? Is it go into effect the next year? What's that process?
For Catherine, if she finishes her doctorate this year, that paperwork gets handed over to HR, and then her salary is adjusted.
Okay. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll seek a motion for approval of the cabinet level administrative salary recommendations.
So moved.
Motion by Dave. Is there a second? Second by Cynthia. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign, or nay. Motion carries. All right. The next item on our agenda is item D, consideration of school board committee and community liaison appointments. As you can see, the school board committee appointment and liaison assignments are outlined as follows. There were a handful of committee assignments where there was an overage of interest, which is always nice. And so there was a couple where we did have to kind of shift around a couple different things. If there's any questions or concerns, you can reach out to Dr. Brenner and or I about placements. Does anyone have any glaring concerns about their placement on the list? Okay. I would ask for a motion of approval of the committee appointments and liaison assignments. Motion by Jeff. Second by Bill. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Last item on our agenda is item E, the consolidated grant application for 2023-2024 federal title funding.
Thank you again, Madam President. On page 14 of your packet, there's a cover memo, and before I even get into the cover memo, I know that you approved me as the interim director of all federal programs, and I just want you to know that it's been an all-hands-on-deck approach with Brandon, with Catherine, myself, Dr. D'Amica Norwood. She's our new federal grants coordinator. She'll be working remotely for us. As a matter of fact, today was her first day. Our new assistant superintendent, when that person starts, that person will have full authority over that. And by the way, we will bring that back to you to shift the responsibility from me to that person. Mary Osowski, Tanya Schleicher, those are two other folks who have been working with us. Tanya's been terrific in her exit to continue working with us and for us in a moonlighting fashion to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. So with the consolidated grant, we're just going to go a little bit deeper this year and provide a little more context to how the money is spent. So the framework or the guide rails that we have, or the guardrails that we have from the Department of Public Instruction are outlined in the memo that we must prioritize the distribution of funds to schools that have the greatest needs, have the highest percentages of numbers of low-income children, are identified for target support, and are identified comprehensive support, of which we have one school, or are identified as persistently dangerous. The second guardrail is that it's necessary and reasonable. All costs charged to federal education grants must be necessary and reasonable considering the amount of money being spent. And included in the application would be Title I, II, III, and IV, and I'll provide some descriptors for those when we get into the slides. And then everything that we do needs to be evidence-based, and you will be seeing that throughout the year as we went through our two-day board training about learning gaps and outcomes. And if you recall, your responsibility is for the outcomes. I'm responsible for input, output, but outcomes will be shared with you at the table. So you can just turn your attention to the screen in front of you, whichever direction is comfortable for you. So the federal funding formula, here's the overview. Again, I already talked about Title I, II, III, and IV, and we put those funds, we wrap those around, or we align those with our Marzano High Reliability Schools activities, along with AVID. You'll probably see AVID come up on another slide. Allocations for staff and programs support students both academically and socially emotionally to help reach the goal of having safe and orderly schools that ensure success for all students. And so in the review, we do set aside funds in Title I for parent engagement. That happens mostly at the building level. We set aside funds for students who are experiencing homelessness. And I think that's a surprise to our community when we even have that conversation. We have more and more students experiencing that, certainly in the last few years than in the history of my work in the school district. For neglected and delinquent students, we have students we serve at RMAC, And then equitable services, we need to provide some funds for our private schools, St. Mike's and Holy Family. Here are the estimated allocations. This won't be final until we submit our final narrative to the DPI, and then we will hear back from them. Title I, you can see 3.1 million. Title II, just about $750,000. Title III, 23,000. That's not a lot for our EL program. And then Title IV, which we've wrapped a lot of our AVID work around that at 372,000. So Title I, just to put things in context for all of you who already know this, but it might be for our viewing audience. Title I is really supplemental funds that assist in improving academic achievement for disadvantaged students or communities, or school communities that are disadvantaged because of socioeconomic status. So provides financial assistance to local education agencies and schools with high numbers of or high percentages of children from low-income families to help ensure that all children meet challenging state academic standards. And here are Title I buildings. Most are at the elementary level. We have one middle school level in Valley. The last couple of years, South Middle School was considered Title I, and now they are coming off of being Title I status. Here are some of the priorities. I'll just take you through the bullets. Reading support staff or interventionists that work both in the reading and math content areas. The second bullet, sometimes schools will buy up or buy more support services than what they would typically have provided by the school district. So in bullet number 2, additional social workers or behavioral interventionists to address the needs of students that struggle emotionally and behaviorally. The third bullet, supplemental staffing, which supports math, which I touched on already. And then any other supplemental instructional coaching, supplies, technology. So the district provides instructional coaches or instructional design coaches, but if our Title I schools want more, they can buy that up with their Title I funds. And here are the set-aside funds as required by Title I, and we've talked about those first 3 bullets already, and actually we talked about the 4th one as well. Title II is really professional development for our teachers, for our principals, for our central office leaders, and this is basically to provide professional development services that will ensure that there is equitable opportunity relative to teaching, learning, curriculum, instruction in all classrooms. So we want to make sure that we don't have any gaps between any of our schools or any of our classrooms. And number 2 talks about the local education agencies and schools being held accountable for improvements in student academic achievement. One of the pieces that we're going to do this year is any position that is added because of federal funding, we're going to tie a metric to that, a student achievement or a social emotional metric to that. So at the end of the year or at the end of the grant, when people, maybe principals from the building level say, hey, will the general fund support this? It's going really well. Well, what does going really well mean? Did we increase attendance by 20% due to chronic absenteeism? Did we improve math and literacy skills by X amount of percentage points? Then we can have those conversations. But if it doesn't show that the investment yielded any results, then we'll have a different conversation. Again, there's a little repetition in some of my slides. Support instructional design coaching at the secondary level, both at the middle and high school, and we do have those positions in place. We have elementary and secondary curriculum coordinators. You've heard some of them speak here in the boardroom as it relates to K-12 curriculum and instruction, and then professional development for all of our certified staff. Title III is for our limited English proficient students. This is the one where I made my remark about 23,000. Doesn't really cover all of the needs that we would have at Red River, Central, South, Century, and Winship. 23,000 doesn't even cover the cost of a half of an FTE. But nonetheless, this is the money that we get, and we provide, some pretty robust services for students who enter into our system with limited English proficiency. But I will say that over the last few years, we haven't seen lots of new students. We might have seen students migrating from another city within the country to Grand Forks, but we aren't seeing a lot of students come from outside of the country. I will skip over that because I talked about it. And then Title IV touches on enrichment. And again, we've invested a lot of dollars in AVID, primarily in Dr. Tack's salary, in our 3 feeder schools, like Agassiz Elementary, Valley, and Central High School, so we can really see some alignment happening between elementary, middle, and high school. And here again, I talked about some of the AVID work and then also our MTSS coordinators. We have 2 here, one for elementary and one for secondary. When I say here, I mean at Sanford Education Center. And then Dr. Tack's position that we just talked about a few minutes ago. So that would be a pretty fast overview of how we're spending that almost $4.2 million. And again, because we'll be doing board education in a more increasing fashion this year, we'll talk about some of those programs and some of those staffing positions and what kind of formative progress we're seeing throughout the year in terms of student achievement data. But I'd be happy to respond to any questions that I would be knowledgeable about.
Any questions for Dr. Brenner? Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the Holy Family St. Michael's equitable deal. Are we responsible to hire the instructors for that, or do they hire them and we reimburse them through the grant?
Good question, Bill. Thank you. They get a percentage of those federal dollars, and then it's been a combination. We've helped them hire in the past, or if we've been overstaffed, we can talk to both principals and say, you know, we've got an extra 0.5 FTE reading specialist. Could we shift this person over to one of your buildings? We've done that in the past. But most recently, they've hired their 3 part-time positions at both of those schools.
The reason I ask, I just noticed that a consent agenda, we accepted a resignation from a Holy Family special ed teacher, and we're just wondering. So thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Cynthia.
Kind of following up with that, just curious whether legislators talk about that. Because of the big push this year to try to get funding choice vouchers for, so I don't know if that ever comes into the play here at all? That they're told that, yes, we do give some money to the schools already for this kind of thing? I don't know.
Not in any of my testimony, but I would suspect in somebody's testimony in Bismarck, they would have said there's an equitable distribution of federal funds that do support reading and math initiatives at private schools. But, yeah, I don't, a little bit of a different conversation about school choice and vouchers.
Yeah, but I wonder if it might be worth just pointing that out. Then I had a question, if I might, about, simple question. Just remind us, please, of the RMAC acronym.
I can do that, Director Shab. It stands for the Ruth Myers Adolescent Center, and that is a facility that houses students who have high mental health needs, probably the highest mental health needs, and it's a full-time facility where they reside and receive services, including educational services. So we staff that with a full-time teacher and a full-time paraeducator.
And I would venture to guess that the terms here, neglected and delinquent, are federal terms?
Yeah, we do not love those terms, but that is correct.
I just have one question. It's my understanding, Cynthia, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're set to get an influx of refugees in the next couple of years. And so I guess my concern is if a city is experiencing more homelessness than usual, or say that goes up, or there's an influx of, English language learners, is there a time where we would apply for like an increase in that title funding? Or could we say we have way more than, we budgeted for? How does that work? Is it just a normal grant cycle?
Yeah, great question. So the EL funding, I believe, is contingent upon the numbers that we have enrolled. So those will automatically flux as they go. But to really answer your point and Dr. Brenner's point, that is a the amount of dollars that we have because of the numbers of students that we have is really inadequate. We, in fact, are looking to stand up an additional coordinator position because we anticipate those needs rising, and we haven't fully met the all of the tracking and data needs that are required for our EL services. And then in anticipation of our incoming families, we want to make sure that we have a really robust program for them. As far as the homeless status students go, I believe, and I'm kind of looking to my right here, I believe that when we are appropriated those dollars, we have the ability to reapportion them to a certain percentage to add some additional dollars to those pots. I believe that can be determined off the top. That would affect the funding levels that go to the buildings, however. So as Dr. Brenner said, we have to kind of, it's called a rank order. We have to rank and order the needs of the highest buildings as far as their data goes, as far as the populations they serve, and that applies to all of the programs. And then but we do have a little bit of wiggle room there, not a ton. But those dollars fund our homeless liaison. Sarah Munson is her name, and also there's enough money in there for us to pay for some of our SIT bus services, the students in transition services, and that's how we've appropriated those dollars. And then we've been the benefactors of some additional dollars from the Grand Forks Education Foundation to augment our programming for those students. So, yeah, we have a community-wide approach to supporting some of our kids who need the most support.
And just to relieve everybody's anxiety, we have resettled 33, our Global Friends has resettled 33 individuals so far, 7 of whom are children, and will be attending the Grand Forks Public Schools. So it's not a huge number. And the cases that we have on our list, there are not as many children, which is unusual because 50% of all refugees are children. But our numbers are not panning that out that way.
Any other questions? If not, I'll seek a motion for approval of the consolidated grant application for 2023-2024. Federal title funding.
So moved.
So moved by Dr. Shab. Is there a second? Second by Bill.
Second.
Bill got you, Joel. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.